right, everyone. How are you doing this kind of foggy, smoky Monday? My name is Christina. If you are tuning in from Victoria's page, if you're tuning in from my page, you've seen me a lot before. And what you know about me is that I like to talk about the hard stuff. I like to give people information on things that we may not bring up in common conversation because it's uncomfortable, but it's very, very valuable. And I've invited my friend Victoria Champion. And she is an advocate for children of abuse. She's a family support worker and she owns her own company. But I thought that she was one of the most perfect people to talk about this as we had a conversation last week. And I was like, people need to know what you know. Like I need to know as a parent what you know to protect my child. And the knowledge that you have is so valuable. So Victoria, thank you so much for being here with me today, for taking the time and to talk about a really tough topic because, in a world right now where sex trafficking and abuse and pedophile rings and all of those things are at the forefront of our minds because they're in the news and they're on social media, I think there's never been a better time to bring light to this topic and help protect our kids. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend Victoria so that you can hear a little bit about her, how she got into this industry, and probably a few things that you really need to know as a parent. And also what she does for a living. So go ahead, Victoria.
Thanks so much, Christina.
You're welcome.
So I actually fell into the kind of social services field actually by accident. I fell into it. I actually was running a day home for kids at one point. I went to school and I had my son and decided that I wanted to stay home with him because I felt that I was able to be in control of his kind of early childhood education, which was really important to me. So I fell into that. And what happened was I separated from my husband at the time and I was struggling. It wasn't easy. And so I walked through the doors of a family support services center and I went in actually looking for a food bank. And the person, she is still one of my dear friends today, and I don't know what I'd do without her, kind of poked her head out the door and was like, "Hey, you went to school, right? And do you want a job?" And I just kind of looked at her like, and I swear, Christina, like my coat was all raggedy. I had rips in my jeans. I had stains, and I'm looking at her like doe in the headlights. And I was just like, are you serious?
You're
This
like
can't
me?
be real. Yeah. Like me, the person that looks like a complete train wreck. And so I took it. And that kind of spiraled my work into preventative services. And then I started working in sexual health, actually, and harm reduction practices. And I learned a lot around families and drug use and sex work at that time. In addition to that, I discovered a little bit more about my birth mother. I am adopted. And so I have that connection to that kind of child piece, right? That
We have that too, by the way. I don't know if you know that about me, but my
Oh
husband's adopted. So
no.
we have that piece too. And I understand that.
Yeah. And there's this piece that, I wouldn't change my parents for the world, but there's always this piece of questioning. So then I started working in child intervention after that. And my whole eyes kind of woke up. So at that time, my son was 8, and I just started making active decisions on things that I never expected to have to make because I just saw the world differently.
Yeah.
And so some of those things include things like, I'm not too fond of sleepovers. I don't personally, that's the choice that I've made, send him to sleepovers unless I've met the parents. And even then, I'm talking, if I meet the parents, I have to know them for like 3 years.
You have to be friends with them and have conversations
Yeah.
with them and like be comfortable with your child going there. And I think that that's a really important thing because so often we're like, everything is safe, or I've met them a couple of times at the school and they're great, but like you also don't know who's coming into their home.
Yeah, you don't know. Absolutely. And just knowing the background and stuff on trafficking, like I've done a little bit of work with different organizations that help women who are sex workers and stuff like that. And just the history that I have with my birth mom doing that work, and just knowing the impact on children and how, my life could have been different.
Yeah.
My life, I could have been one on the streets. I could have been in a different situation if it wasn't for child intervention. Not that it was child intervention, but it was an open adoption. It was an active process that my birth mom took, but that could not have been the case, right? And so, yeah, some of those things are just really eye-opening. There's a lot of different things that we don't see, things that happen in our backyard that we never would have thought happened.
And to see that because of your job. And I'm sure, like, if I had your job, I wouldn't sleep at night. Like, I would, you see all these other things that are happening behind the scenes. And I remember somebody saying to me, Christina, at the time I was living in Victoria, and they're like, if you knew how many registered sex offenders were in your area, you would never live there. Like,
and that's the case for everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, where are you supposed to live? Right. And so I know that there are things that you can do that can help to protect your child themselves and your child's friends. Right. So if you feel that you can be the safe place, the safe home, I mean, everyone's going to think that after this video, though, that they can be the safe place.
Right.
And with COVID right now, we're blessed with no sleepovers and no kind of.
Right.
There's dangerous,
extended time together.
Yeah. But with COVID, that has also brought up other issues, for example, because children have been at home for a lot longer.
Yeah.
And that brings up, like, we, statistically speaking, September and January are the two highest rates for poverty and for just reports to children's services, to the ministries, to different stuff like that. And that's partly because school costs, and then also after Christmas, right? And it's just stats. Like, that's not me making stuff up. Like, it's just a reality of the amount of referrals we get in. And so and even just company wise, like, I see an influx of people needing different health services during those times, needing more access to support because it's just a reality of those times. So we're seeing that right now. We're September right now. And with school being back just last week, we're going to see just different things happening. And especially normally it's 2 months of the summer. It's actually going to be like 6 months or 5 months, depending on who went home when before back to school. And that's a long time to be in a home that might not be safe or that might not be comfortable and with no support. And I think that human connection is really important too.
Yeah.
So there's a balance there.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about are, like, what are you said you started getting into this industry when you said your son was 8? And
before then, but that's when I specifically started in child intervention.
And you started thinking about different things that could affect your son. So what are some of the things that school-age children should, the parents of them should be aware of when they're back to school or on their devices, or, like, what are some of the big red flags that parents should be aware of?
So I think some of the red flags are definitely noticing your own child's temperament and noticing any changes in their behavior, and really being tuned into your kids. In terms of devices, my son's now 11, and it's really starting to get a little bit more worrisome, right? Because he's trying to communicate. I've kept it up until this year where he only played games where there was no messaging attached.
Smart.
So most games, that's really hard to do because most games do have messaging attached and you don't know who they're talking to. And so one thing that I've adopted into my life as much as I can, I'm not too much of a gamer, but my partner is we play the same games that he does. So yeah, it takes time. Yeah, it's not necessarily something I want to do, but I understand the games. I understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, and who they might be communicating with. And being able to play alongside of him creates another attachment with him, which, I mean, that's where he's at right now. He loves to game. So that's something that I can do with him, which ends up being a positive thing, right? And he doesn't necessarily need to know that I'm monitoring his whole life until he's 21 and sees this video.
Right.
So,
but I think you also said something really important, because you said not only are you doing this with him, but I'm assuming that your game consult is in a public place. It's not in his room. It's not in like a closed game area. It's in your family room where people are around. So you can be aware if, it does get to a point as he gets older that he will be in chat groups like that. I can imagine how nerve-wracking that'll be, but he will be. And so as long as it's in a public place, I remember growing up, and I know this is so silly, but this is going to age me. MSN Messenger back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But our computer, it had to be in front, like it was in the kitchen, it was in the family room, like it was where my parents could see it and walk in on me at any time and see what I'm talking about.
Yes, exactly. And that does bring up another good point, is learning the language that makes you tap out of that messaging. Because I remember as a kid on MSN Messenger using different terms to be like, oh, parents are here, and just then like changing the conversation. So I got to get up to date. I heard my son come back with a few new words this week, and I'm like, Urban Dictionary, what does that mean? So that might age me a little bit too, but that's okay. I definitely think that learning the language and trying to keep up to date, and is it ridiculous half the time? Absolutely. But we need to be on top of it. It's a way that we can protect our kids and protect the kid on the other side too, if they are a child, right? So
right, absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I really like that you talk about is having a family charging station, because nowadays kids are younger and younger and younger and getting iPads, and they're like, you got to make sure what the parental settings are on iPads. Or even for Izzy, I make sure that she can't go online with her because she doesn't know any better, right? So I make sure that she can't go online, and then having a family charging station that is in your kitchen or whatever, because your kids don't need to be in their rooms at night with their phone.
No, absolutely not. There's no reason for that. I mean, even for me, when I go to bed, my phone sure might be by my bed, but I'm adopted the habit that I'm not on my phone before bed, because I want to show that to my child. And the other thing that passcode everything. You can passcode Netflix, you can passcode your TELUS Optic if that's what you have, because you can scroll through any channel and click on it and play something. Whereas if you passcode it, even if he's scrolling through Discovery and sees something and, whatever it is, it needs to be passcoded for him to access it. That's a really good thing that you can do that's active in your home. And so even if you have friends over and you leave the room for a second, and that random kid who you don't maybe know that well goes and it's like, hey, let's throw on this channel, it's passcoded, they're not going to get very far. And then you come up and you're like, oh, is that what you're doing? Right. So,
right. That buys you some time as a parent to see what they're up to.
Exactly. So that's something I definitely encourage, passcoding everything. And it's not, it just means that they have to come to you and be like, hey, can I watch this?
And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think that, there's a lot of leniency in parenting, but I just think it's not about creating fear in parents. It's about making them aware of the choices that they're making. And Izzy is young now, but in a few years, she's going to be able to figure out, hey, I'm in the kids' Netflix. I can switch over to my parents' profile. And like, I just saw somebody I really respect get rid of their Netflix profile completely because they're over sexualizing children and making it normal for them to see. And that's what people, I think, don't understand, is that if they can go watch a TV show where it's normal at their age to have crushes or this or that, and they over sexualize them, they don't know the difference to getting attention in real life. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's ways that we are able to prevent that, right? We don't need to, I think that there is an element of fear, and my cat's just coming to visit. I apologize. Yeah, there's a way that we can help to prevent that, because I also think that the reality is that technology is part of our world.
Yeah.
And we have kids, like, they are in school and their primary mode is technology. They, even just this year with COVID, they are not using paper anymore, barely, right?
So, and they're going to know so much more than we will. Like, they're going to be so much more diligent in their online skills than we will be, right, as parents.
Yeah, exactly. And so if we can figure out what that looks like, for example, I actually have his Google Classroom on my phone as well. So I can see everything. I see everything that goes in, and I'm not tracking his homework. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just tracking any messages that might go through, because you can message in there. Do I trust that the teacher's there? Absolutely. But we need to be a team. Yeah. We can't count on the teacher to monitor every single thing, because they have 20, 30, 40 students, whatever it is, right? So
I'm so happy that you said that, because so many parents of this generation, of our generation, put their kids at school or at daycare and like, yeah, they got them. They got them, you know, it's up to them. And the difference is in my parents' generation, like you were in school and you're misbehaving, and the teacher went to the parent and said, hey, like you got to figure out your kid. They're being a total jerk, right? But now, you know, if kids have any bad reviews, the parents are going in and be like, what's wrong with you? Like going at the teacher. And whereas really we need to be a partnership in this. Like it's not easy for them to deal with the technology. And, you know, especially now older kids that are doing Zoom classes and not even putting their video on or not being present or whatever it is behind the scenes. You know, some of those, it's really funny because just like I found out one way or other that any of the private chats in Zoom, by the way, the person that's recording the Zoom or the person that's doing the Zoom will get a total readout of exactly what was said in the chat, regardless of that privateness, right? Like if you think you're having a private chat with somebody else, you know, that was something that was pretty exposing when people first started using Zoom and they didn't know. So that's exactly right. That is, like you said, with this, with their Google Home or their Google School, I forget what you call that app, like that you guys are Classroom, right? So for you to be able to go through and see the messages is like, actually, it's not being overprotective, it's being aware and conscious of your kids and what they're involved in, right?
And most of the time there's nothing. And you don't go in guns a-blazing saying like, oh my God, what did you say or do? You go in and have a conversation, because they might not know that what they're doing is wrong, or even just like maybe one of the kids does, or maybe they got into the conversation and they didn't know how to get out of it, because we are also lacking communication skills. That's another thing that we're struggling with. So
totally. So are there any other things that you can think of that are like really big, like red flags, like rules in your house that because of your background, because of your knowledge, that other parents that didn't do what you do would be unaware of?
Well, some things that I actually encourage is to take courses, like your kids take courses like Home Alone or the Babysitter's course, whether they plan on babysitting or not, because there's some real skills there that you can use. I make sure, and in terms of red flags, I think that it's all dependent on circumstance. But I definitely, you know, you have a kid that's withdrawn, and so, or whatever, you have, anxiety presents in different ways, depression presents in different ways, and abuse presents in different ways. You might have a kid who comes home with your kid and just to hang out or after school or whatever. And they don't have those boundaries. They might be in your face, or they might cross over and, you know, we'll say, hey, if you you can play with anything downstairs except for the guitar, for example. But the one thing they go to is the guitar, right? And it's like, okay, so why don't you know how to follow those rules? And not to necessarily judge that child, because it might not be their fault, but figuring out like, hey, okay, so how can I support this child? Because in that moment, you are that child's support. Whether the other parents know that they're there or not, whether you're in regular touch with them, and setting boundaries with those parents and figuring out what that looks like for you, and making sure that you guys know, hey, these are the rules. And, you know, like we can't go and discipline other children, but we can communicate with other parents and with the children in your home.
Absolutely. I mean, I even see that now, just different parenting results, like you get different results in your kids. Like this is different parents deal with conflict in different ways. And then obviously the kids deal with conflict in different ways, or with rules or guidelines or boundaries, right? So I really appreciate that. I would love, so I didn't mention this before, but Victoria and I met because she also works with TEDx, and that's how we met through all of this, which I think is incredible, you know, online, that we can connect with like-minded people and be able to get our messages out. But what I would love for you to talk about is a little bit about your company and your business and what you do to help people.
Sure. So my company, our mission is to address health for individuals and families through different innovation, sustainability, and collaboration and education to create personalized health outcomes. So the idea would be to strengthen those people and strengthen health in our communities. So doing the work that I do, I noticed a lot of gaps in our health system. And I say health system, but it's really a whole collective system.
Right, you're not just talking about like eating healthy, you're talking about like mental health and physical well-being and
Yeah.
all those things.
Yeah. And so it started out where I was hoping to address period poverty, especially in young teenage girls, actually, because it's
Can you
something
explain to
that
people what that is so that they know what you're talking about?
absolutely. So period poverty is basically people who menstruate don't have access to supplies because they're might be poor, struggling, whatever that looks like. They're choosing baby formula over pads and tampons, whatever that looks like. And so I started to notice that when I was doing outreach, a huge gap in our community. And then I incorporated a few years ago, and we take donations and we bring them to places. So what a lot of people don't know is that the food bank accepts feminine hygiene products. Most food banks do. They don't turn them away. And so they can be distributed through food bank applications, which means that you don't have to vet a lot of people are like, well, if I'm giving money, I want to know where it's going. Okay, well, with a food bank, you have to qualify, you have to provide all those IDs and stuff like that. And that's where some of it started to stem from, was I noticed that, okay, well, what if this person doesn't have ID? What if this person actually doesn't have a home? To get food bank, you actually have to have a home. So that was really interesting for me. And so I really started to figure out what filling the gaps looks like, and working in female health specifically, but then it started to expand to men's health, to just health advocacy in general, because it's something that we don't have. Even just the idea of transportation. So we live in the north. We have very limited transportation here. Even just getting to, if you live on the north or south side of town, the clinic is a 10-kilometer walk.
Wow.
So,
and you don't think about all these logistics until
Yeah.
you see the other side. Like, I wouldn't think of that. I didn't know that you had to have a home to register for the food bank. I didn't, like, it's really, thank you for educating us on that stuff, because we wouldn't know.
For sure.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, yeah. And so we don't have a transportation program here. Well, we do. We have a taxi pass program, which you still have to pay for. And so it's kind of this, and I started to notice even in child intervention, just the way there's so many gaps. Like, as soon as, so let's say, for example, you are struggling and you lose your children, which happens, you lose your child tax immediately, which, I mean, you don't have your children. So I guess government wise, that makes sense. But then your income supports are also almost cut in half if you're on income supports. And then they're like, well, just go get a job. But then you have regular court dates, regular attendance on, and regular expectations if you want your children back. And so you're stuck in a cycle of, okay, how do I get a new home when I bring in $600 a month?
Right.
It is impossible. Like, it is impossible.
Absolutely.
And so that's my goal, is to kind of start to address some of those gaps, because it doesn't work right now. It just doesn't.
You can't get your way out. You can't work your way out. There's no, it doesn't work. Their program that they're telling you to just follow A, B, and C and you'll be back on your way. It is dysfunctional. So it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so basically you help people kind of navigate through that.
Yes, exactly. And it is overall health. Health can look like so many different things for people. And so whether it's their addiction, whether it's even just, for example, the closest place that you can go get to terminate a pregnancy, for example, if that's something that someone chooses to do, is 6 hours from here.
Wow.
So yeah. That's for like a drop-in medical center. You can book an appointment that's a 6 to 8 week wait list that's 2.5 hours from here. But then the timeline, and that's a choice that it's already hard enough to make. It's not like somebody walks in and is like, hey, I'm going to go do this today.
Right.
It's, whatever people's stance is on it, we don't have the healthcare here for it. We don't have the mental health support for it, for somebody to walk through and have those discussions with them. We don't have the physical health. You can't even get a doctor's appointment to make a referral within 2 weeks. Like, and that's where, even just getting birth control, like even getting any sort of healthcare is next to impossible. And they're telling you, well,
we're in Canada, we have free healthcare.
Yeah, it's free. And the North is a whole other ballgame too. And we don't have a walk-in clinic.
Yeah.
They tell you to go to Merge, but if you have the flu right now, you can't because of COVID. So where do you go? And it's just so addressing healthcare is really important to me. Partly because of my own personal journey and partly just for the people that I care about.
Absolutely. Well, Victoria, I'm thankful that you came on today and gave us, a little bit of insight into your life and some of the knowledge and wisdom that you've acquired doing what you do, because you have a different perspective than us who think that everything is sunshine and rainbows. And I mean, I'm very aware of what I do online, and I'm very aware that my daughter is exposed to that. And so we're very particular about not sharing our locations. I don't share the name of her school. I don't say we're at this park right now. You'll see me maybe put a story together, but it won't be when we're there, right? Like it'll never be, they'll never have a location set with us when we're with her, because I think that it's really important to be aware of those things. And do I think that it's overreacting? No, I don't. Knowing what's going on in the world and knowing who's around. And I mean, we used to live downtown, like I said, downtown Victoria. Mm-hmm. And we lived in an area that was up and coming. We lived a block from the police department. The police parked in the parking lot across from our road and walked back and forth. But there were halfway houses there. And, people are getting out of prison or getting out of treatment. And there'd be on the news, oh, this sex offender, this terrible abusive sex offender is just released in Victoria, or this child sex offender or whatever. Right. Yeah. And so we're aware of those things. And those kind of make us wake up as parents, but we don't think of the day-to-day. We don't think of, oh, I'll just ask this person to pick up my kid from school, or it's not a big deal, soccer practice, get a ride home. Or we don't think about those things, but they're there. And but you see those cases all the time, which gives you a different awareness. And I just think more parents need to have that awareness and err on the side of caution, because there's so many things that they don't know. And it's so much more important to be informed than it is to just be naive and just say, oh, everything's fine, right? Like, oh, I live here, my neighbors are safe, I know my neighbors, I know this, I know that, but are you really? And that question haunts me. Like that question haunts me. I don't know what I don't know. And that's why
this is true. Yeah. Well, and I think that there's a lot that we can do that can be in our control. So I don't know if you want to do a top 5 things.
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's do a top 5.
So I think number 1 would be know the parents that your kids hang out with and have a relationship with them. Have coffee, whatever, and have a relationship with them. I'm not saying you have to be best friends with them, but just kind of know who they are, right? Spend some time with them. Number 2 would be create a safe space in your home and create time to talk about anything. So for us, right before kind of he goes for a shower, gets ready for bed kind of thing, we'll have us talk. Is there anything you need to talk about today? Anything, with a no judgment, no thing, no whatever, right? So creating a safe space to have conversations without making sure that your child feels fearful of what they're going to tell you. Right. The other thing that I recommend is have a resource list on your fridge of the different locations and the different safe places in town. And just kind of have that aware to your child, but also for any children that might come to your house that are hanging out with your kid, right? Because they might, you don't have to give copies to them. You don't need to give here's a bunch of mental health stuff. Yeah. But the thing is that it might be on the fridge and they might just be like, hey, kids help phone, what's that? Create
a conversation, give them reason to have a conversation about it.
Exactly. And even then, maybe they'll just go home. Maybe they'll just steal the number on their phone, take a picture of it, right? And just have it available, and just know that, there are services out there that can help. Yes, there's gaps. Yes, there's stuff, but there are international or national resources that we can access. So have that resource list on your fridge for sure. Number 4, communicate. So let your child know about their bodies. That's really important for me, especially working in health. Make sure they know the real words and their rights, what they have a right to. What read through the charter with them. Read through children have rights. Read through whatever it looks like to make sure that they know their right to education, to their bodies, to all of those things. Make sure that they know those things and communicate on an ongoing basis. And the last one for me is always going to come down to boundaries. I mentioned just, it's such a small community here that if I see a client, I might just like duck around the corner or something like that, just to make sure that I don't have a reason to put them in jeopardy or my family in jeopardy, kind of thing, right? But set boundaries across the board. Even just make sure they know to knock on your door when you're in bed. Like, you might be changing, you might be even just having time with your partner, and making sure that whatever boundaries that you need to set in place in your home are there, because that is so important, so important. And I can't tell you what your boundaries are, what that'll look like for anybody, but I do know that it is super important, because if we don't have it, then you do have people that will overstep and they won't know how to communicate.
And you're modeling that behavior for your kids, right? If you have boundaries, then they're allowed to have boundaries too. You know, one of the things that we taught Izzy, she would get upset because she wanted to be left alone. Mm-hmm. You can just ask for privacy. You can have the privacy. And when you say stop, this is another huge one. When you say stop, whether I'm tickling her, whether we're playing outside and it gets to be too much, when she says stop, hands go up and I stop and everything stops. Having that boundary. I really love also that you mentioned knowing the proper names for body parts, because I remember when Izzy was little, she'd be like, oh, my body. And like, that could mean anything to people, but it meant something different to us. And so she could say that in front of a childcare provider, or she could say that at school and they'd be like, oh, okay, like no big deal. But if it was something that was more specific and she could articulate that, then it would change the game and how people reacted. And I think that that's a huge tip for people, because they don't in the beginning, like when your kids are little, they don't teach them the proper words, because they're like, oh, should they really know that? Yeah, they should, because it's just a body part. And this is actually like a private body part that is for you only, or, like, or what, and you can have that conversation later on.
Yes, exactly.
Right? But like, you have to understand that you've got to speak to them at their level, and maybe boundaries start at you say stop and everybody stops. Maybe boundaries stop at closing the door and knocking, right? Because it's a different level of understanding at every, at every age.
Absolutely. And I think, there were jokes going around a couple of years ago about asking your baby for consent when you're changing them. And I remember this being a whole thing. And I remember thinking, no, we should ask. Okay, yeah, you're going to change them. They need a clean butt. Absolutely. But asking them and just starting that conversation early is super important. And just as soon as you start talking to them, most of the time babies will, even if they're crying a bit, they'll just start to coo at you, and just, you're also creating an attachment, which is really important. And so asking consent across the board is important. And you can model that with your partner, in front of your kids. Hey, can I get a hug? And then your kid is like, why'd you ask for a hug? Okay, well, it's important. We need to make sure we're asking.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And that's also, you can teach that to kids really young, because even then, she'll say, oh, I want to go give them a hug. Well, did you ask? You have to ask them if they want a hug. Right. Yeah, and that's, you can teach that at very, very young, and between parents, between kids, between siblings, with your pets, whatever you need to use the tool to do that. Right. So that's really great. Thank you so much, Victoria. You had so much knowledge and wisdom that you shared with us today. So I really appreciate you being here. And I'm sure that we'll have other talks like this.
I agree. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have an awesome evening or afternoon, I guess.
Yeah, you too.
We'll see you later. Okay.
Bye.